Welcome to the TELUS Originals DocTalks, a series of talks dedicated to craft, themes, and ideas behind TELUS Originals documentaries with the people behind and in front of the camera. I'm your host, Sabrina Rani Furminger, and for this episode, we'll be talking to Luc Fandrich about Your Cinema Needs You. Your Cinema Needs You traces the origins of the Monarch Theatre in Medicine Hat, Alberta, and its unexpected but eventful evolution in becoming the oldest surviving purpose-built cinema remaining in Canada today. Through closures, advances in technology, and a cast of characters who have kept it alive through decades of challenges, Your Cinema Needs You tells the story of the coolest little single-screen movie house you've never heard of since it first opened its doors on December 21st, 1911, and the clues that such a building can give us about understanding the values of the past. Telling that story is filmmaker Luc Fandrich. Luc began his professional career in 2008 as an editor, director, and commercial photographer following a BFA in media production and studies at the University of Regina in Saskatchewan. His production company, Editing Luc, has produced dozens of promotional campaigns, short-form documentaries, and international editorial content in relation to the experiential travel photography and video that the brand first built its online audience around. Following a decade of successful commercial work, Luc produced and directed his first feature-length documentary in 2019 titled Clay, Creativity, and the Comeback, about how the industrial ruins of a former ceramic powerhouse were saved by a group of dedicated volunteers to become a renewed cultural landmark, international artist hub, and now a formally recognized National Historic Site of Canada. Today, we'll speak with Luc about his journey with Your Cinema Needs You and the inherent magic of heritage movie theaters. Luc Fandrich, welcome to TELUS Originals DocTalks.
Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you here. Let's get right into it. Let's get right into the heart of this film. The heart of this film is the Monarch Theatre, which is a building that is so much more than a building. I know you are from Medicine Hat. We learned that in the film. What is your earliest memory of the Monarch?
Well, as a kid in the 90s, I remember the Monarch was always the old theater downtown. It was always the one that seemed to be, if the town theater was full, the spillover movies went to the Monarch Theatre. And as a little kid, I remember that they had these seats that were on a spring that were on rollers. So they would roll forward to the seating position. But as a kid, I specifically remember not being heavy enough to hold the seat in position. And so it was actually a really irritating theater to be in as a little kid. You spent most of the movie trying to put your feet up on the seat in front of you to hold your seat in place. Those eventually disappeared. They cleared those seats out in the late 90s. And so by the time I was a teenager, it was actually a really great theater to go to. But that was my earliest memory of the Monarch.
That is an unexpected story, frankly. When did you first feel the magic of the Monarch?
To be honest, probably not until I came back to Medicine Hat after university. I kind of discovered a lot of my hometown again after coming back home and realized there was kind of all these stories and interesting places that I had just never really looked into and no one had really told before. And around that time, by the time I got back, the Monarch was, I think it was celebrating its centennial. And so suddenly there was all this discussion about the history of this place and that there might be more significance here than people realized. And then again, and it kind of faded into the background again. But that early discussion sort of stuck in my brain about the historic nature of it and that it was potentially at the time they were saying the oldest theater in Alberta. And so that was kind of my, I guess, refresh of looking at the Monarch Theatre in a different way.
One of the very special things about your film is the fact that you are present in your film, and not just you, but your parents as well. Wonderful to see them. And I feel like I met half the town, in your film as well. But, in telling the story of, the monarch's journey through time, we also get a sense of your journey, in trying to, go down the rabbit hole, in trying to find, this information, to kind of like panning for gold. At the beginning of your journey, though, what did you, what story did you, set out to tell, and how did that change, as you went along?
Well, geez, that's a big question, because
that's the big question, eh?
I mean, at the beginning of the process of putting the proposal together, originally I was thinking this was going to be a story about the Monarch Theatre and how it has endured and how it survived. But right around the time that the proposal got completed, the Monarch Theatre closed. And so that immediately kind of threw a wrench into what I thought this was going to be, because suddenly I didn't have this built-in happy ending. It was sort of, oh, well, I'm going to invest all this time in finding a story to a place that maybe no one is going to be able to go to anymore. And, what is the payoff of telling a story about a place that maybe is about to fade away? And so that immediately was a hurdle to overcome about, okay, I'm gonna do this, and maybe someone is going to rally around this film and maybe start seeing the monarch in a new way. But yeah, right from the beginning, I was thinking it was going to be sort of this interesting telling of how movie theaters have kind of evolved everywhere in Canada. I think a lot of places have a Monarch Theatre that existed downtown that has either disappeared or has been repurposed or been changed into a bar or a nightclub or a live theater venue. So there were crumbs that I saw there that I was like, okay, I can make something out of this. But there was a real concern that right from the get-go, the story was going to be evolving throughout production, and that it was going to turn into something that I was going to maybe be chasing and hoping that we were going to get an outcome that, okay, someone wants to do something, or there's something to cling to here, or, maybe the film is going to be the catalyst for someone wanting to save the monarch when it's done. As you know, and not to spoil everything, but the monarch did reopen as we were making the movie, and as part of that, and we held out essentially for a year for that very outcome, so that we could work that into the narrative, and so that this film about the monarch could be the movie that would reopen the Monarch Theatre. So, been a journey.
It's such a journey, and I admit when whoever did the voiceover, and I know it's you, it was like, and the film that opened the monarch, it was your film. I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing! Like that must have been a very meta experience, and we'll talk about that a little bit further into the conversation.
Sure.
But when the film opens, I think we see you like in the, I don't know if it's the bowels of the theater, or behind. Honestly, you should have been wearing a mask. Like, that's what I kept thinking. Like, I don't know what he's breathing in there, But tell me about like your experience, of going into the monarch, and when you're standing, there in these spaces, that have been, maybe neglected for years, or people just dump stuff in there. What were you hoping to find? We do see what you end up finding. What were you hoping to find? And also, like, what did you feel, in those moments?
I mean, early on, I was really grasping for anything that felt like it would advance the story in some way. Because I think that's another interesting part of this project is it's not like the monarch had been heavily documented, or that people had written about it or told the story already. I had a few dates when I started this. And so I knew, okay, ownership changed at this point and, this happened at this date. But that was really it. And so when I was inside the Monarch, I was looking for the emotional part of the story. I wanted to find clues that you could tell people had been here, the former managers or projectionists or moviegoers. I wanted to find things that made it real and not just a statistic. And so that was really the exciting part of it, was kind of piecing together all these little random clues that I kept finding. And a lot of them would go nowhere. You were kind of like, oh, this is awesome. This would be amazing to go off on this tangent, but there's really nothing there. And then occasionally you would find these random pieces and it would link to a name, or it would link to another location, or it would give me the opportunity to use my social media audience to reach out and say, does anybody know who this person was? Or was this someone from your family? And amazingly, it all happened in little fragments like that, where it would connect me with somebody else, which would lead to a family album, which would find another picture. Or you'd find someone saying, I was looking in the basement today, I found this, does anyone know what this is? And then you get another little clue. And it was lots of those pieces that started to fit together like a puzzle, where I realized, okay, I'm finding the variety and I'm finding a thread that I can sort of turn into a narrative that is more interesting than it just being a PowerPoint of, an old building. It's actually
story of a building. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a living place that all these people had come in and out of over decades, that I'm actually able to start distilling into something that you can sink your teeth into a little bit.
Yeah. I would say, though, it seems like this is a fairly non-traditional journey for a documentarian, to take. Because you it seems like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you began this, thinking, okay, I can actually be part of maybe the story of, the Monarch, and like maybe we can be part of like helping it, keep going. And you're standing there looking for clues, like some kind of Indiana Jones,
right?
and like it just strikes me now that the you of the Your Cinema Needs You is you.
Well, it is.
Is that true?
It's me. It's me.
Your cinema needed you.
It's everybody else who watched it. It is. It's it takes a village, right, to make all this stuff work and to bring a story like this to life. I've said multiple times throughout production that the ability to tell this story hinged so heavily on my own audience, and the fact that I had already built a social media audience who was familiar enough with my work to see me doing this and then actually want to help. Because, like I said, there was nothing written. And so if I didn't have access to all these people who were already, interspersed throughout the province, but who had a connection to Medicine Hat as well, that is what made it possible to even tell the story, because you needed links to people's family photo albums, and there's no search engine for that. There's no way to say, I'm looking for something very specific, and then have people say, oh, I want to help you do that. Because that happened so many times throughout this whole production. And, we would have lost such a big part of the story had people not been willing to do that, just because with 112, 113 years of story, you really do have to sanitize a lot of it to even fit it into a 2-hour movie. So it was kind of amazing, just the way that people kind of did. They rallied to make it possible to even tell the story.
What an adventure. So in all of your research of the massive, I can't even believe that the movie industry has been around as long as it has, let alone this theater, more than 100 years. Of all of the different time periods and eras in the Monarch Theater's history, like, what was your favorite as you were going through all the different eras?
I personally really love all the mid-century stuff. I think it's you kind of get like this sweet spot of the transition between the theater being the spot to consume media to the introduction of television. You also get this interesting transition between having cartoons that would open at the beginning of movies and intermissions, and all these great nostalgic bumpers that used to appear in the movie theater and at the drive-in. All of that stuff is a dream, I think, is anyone who loves film to play around with and find and see what has survived on some of these old reels. So yeah, the mid-century stuff was a personal highlight for me.
Okay, so then we're going to do a little thought experiment here.
Okay.
I want you to take us into the Monarch Theatre in mid-century. This is right before TV. TV's not there yet, so it's almost there. Mm-hmm. We are stepping inside. What are we seeing? What are we smelling? Who's there with me? Tell me about the clientele. I want the full sets, because I have to say, we get this from your film. We get this sensory, you're able to really bring that, to us. So, but for our listeners and viewers, bring us in there.
Well, so mid-century, the Monarch Theatre is a community gathering space. It is a hub that is running every day of the week. You're going to see matinees in the afternoon. You're going to see the early evening show, and you're going to see the late show, all in the same building. And so you're going to have families and moms and their kids coming in the daytime. Then it's going to transition in the evening for everyone who's coming off of work to come and hang out and sit in the theater together. Might even see a newsreel at the beginning of the show still. And then, like I said, you have a 7 o'clock show and you've got a 9 o'clock show. And this would be every single day of the week. And the theater would almost always be full. It was not a casual outing like we think of it today, where it's like you go in and maybe you have the theater to yourself sometimes. This was always a busy place. And so you walk in the door, the concession and candy counter is right there to get everything from your cup of coffee to pop and popcorn and everything in between. And in addition to that, you'd also have your ushers standing at each side of the door who would usher you to the seat and who would also continually rotate the patrons who were inside the theater. As people moved out of the front, they'd move other people forward and cycle back. Because like I said, it wasn't as static as you think of the movie experience today, where you go in and just sit and watch your movie. There were breaks. There was an intermission, or there was a break between the newsreel and the cartoon. And so there was always people kind of getting up and coming and going and rotating in and out. And when you think of it like that, it is actually a way more lively experience than what you think of even going to a theater to be, which is just sitting in your chair and consuming what's happening. Because for a lot of people, it was also a social outing. So you're going there, and in these breaks, you're catching up with your neighbor, and you're catching up with the guy down the street who you saw in the shop today. And, this was your social media, this is the social media of the day, to actually see what was happening in the community, because you knew throughout the week, everybody was probably going to be there at some point. And so that part of it is kind of something I think we've lost, just because we have so much other ways to communicate now. But that was it. The theater was your social gathering spot, just because if you wanted to know what was happening in the world outside of the community you lived in, you went to the movie theater. Yeah.
It's incredible how a building can be so much more than, brick and mortar. It's it's a community gathering place. It's also a way of finding out what's going on in the world. Like you talk about the newsreels, one of the kind of the threads you explore in the film is how, during the war, yes, there was photography, but if you wanted to see some footage of what was going on, it would have to be in a movie theater. Absolutely. It would have to be, in a movie theater, one of those newsreels, right? So it was incredibly important. What was there anything that you learned, in your journey of getting to know the Monarch in this kind of way, that maybe changed your ideas about Medicine Hat, and what has mattered to it at different points in its history?
Well, one of the things that still sticks with me is that the Monarch is even here, because it's kind of just this accident that it has this claim to fame of it surviving as long as it has, and that it just happens to still be downtown here. I just finished a travel shoot 2 weeks ago in New York City, and was following up on some festival information. And just as a side thing, I decided I'm going to go see the oldest surviving cinema that exists in New York City. And The oldest surviving cinema in New York City is from 1921. So the Monarch is 10 years older than that. And it just, like I said, this is not uncommon because silent cinemas in general got phased out heavily when sound came in. But then for it to also be a cinema that got repurposed and then still exists in prime real estate in downtown in all these major cities just doesn't really happen. A lot of them disappeared and got replaced with office towers and other things. So in a place like New York City, where they've got tons of great theaters and lots of other live theaters that have survived, the fact that the oldest surviving cinema in a place like New York City is still 10 years newer than this little Monarch theater that happens to exist in Medicine Hat, where I'm from, that's amazing to me. That's such an interesting claim to fame. And again, old theaters are sort of like this great repository of film history. Is like to be in a place that Charlie Chaplin films premiered, and also, everything up to Independence Day and whatever blockbuster that has followed. It's like anything and everything has played in this one building. And so if you have a favorite movie, chances are it played in the Monarch Theater. And how amazing is it to sit in a space like that and realize, like, I'm sitting in film history right now?
That's incredible. Like, I don't mean to get kind of spooky or anything, but like, did you feel, but I do mean to get spooky, and I'm leaning forward because, I always find it kind of creepy to be in like abandoned spaces or, like a school that doesn't have kids in it or whatever. But I feel like, these spaces, especially the old ones, they hold the memories, they hold the magic, they hold the people. Did you feel any of that power, like powerful thing? I know there were people that in the film were talking about, how haunted and stuff.
There's no shortage of people who have ghost stories to tell. I think anyone of a certain age who has been in the Monarch will tell you that it is haunted or that they have heard things. I personally didn't, but I can say, having been in that space alone at 11 p.m. at the end of wrapping up a shoot, that building makes noise. It is creaking. It is old. There's an ambiance in there that you feel that history. You feel the weight of the history in a place like that, just because it feels like it's always sort of groaning and shifting, and the basement is dark and there's all this blank space that you're kind of never seeing, and you're like, this is a horror movie, but a really cool horror movie, because there's just so much interest to sort of like draw your attention everywhere, So there's definitely an energy in a place like the Monarch Theater, and you can let your imagination.
Cinema needs you.
Yeah, you can let your imagination go where you want it to in a place like that. So.
Oh, that's great. When you were exploring and you were finding like, and I love history. I just like, and I love exploring my grandparents' old barn and finding old matchbooks and things. What was your favorite find? Why was it the ceiling tiles? Because I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, so there was all those things that appear in the film that are kind of, interesting little narrative devices that progress the story along. One of the really neat things that I ended up acquiring because of the documentary was when I went looking for the seats that had been removed, I found somebody who actually had a set when they switched them out in the 90s, who had them sitting in I think it was a shed in the backyard. He had just gone and picked them up because the Monarch had given them away for free. And I just said, can I buy these off of you? And so I have a set of Monarch seats sitting in my living room now. And so
the ones with the springs that you could
the ones with the springs from my own childhood that are they're mid-century. They came out of the theater in the 90s. Now a set is in my living room. And so I was like, that's probably the best souvenir that I could have from making the movie, and then also having a piece of it. So that was a pretty amazing find, because that was just totally random that someone happened to say, I think I've got a set if you want to come and have a look. And they were actually kept really well. They were covered. So they looked exactly as I'm sure they did coming out of the theater in the 90s. Gave them a good dusting, and yeah, they look great. They look like old school movie seats.
And you're able to actually sit in it now, right?
And you can actually sit in them, yeah. They still got the
okay, yeah. That's wild. So over the course of the film, we meet a lot of different people who worked in not just the Monarch, but other theaters around town, people who are committed to bringing it back. And we also hear reference made to, but you don't feature these voices in the film, that there are people who are just like, who cares? Like people, who were part of, in Medicine Hat, who are just like not as committed, to the restoration and the existence of the Monarch Theater as others. Like, what do you say? What did you say? What do you say to people who don't get why it's important to cherish a building like the Monarch?
I think it's a case of you don't know what you've lost until it's actually gone. The thing that makes the Monarch, I think, so interesting, particularly after you've seen this movie, is you realize how much has gone. A lot of people growing up in Medicine Hat, myself included, really only knew of the town and the Monarch, and then we got a Cineplex. Those are the movie theaters. That's all you really know. And there's actually lots of other movie theaters that existed in Medicine Hat, but they just all went by 1960. So there's this sense of, I think, this, again, communal experience that you get from sitting in a movie theater and actually experiencing something together when you're with other people, when you're on a date or with your friends, growing up and going on birthday parties, all this stuff that kind of became like this shared sense of we're going to do this together, but because you're going out, it became an event, as opposed to sitting at home and, the number of times that you scroll through something or you put something on and you realize, oh, I haven't even really watched it because I was playing on my phone or someone was talking or whatever. That experience of actually sitting down and putting your full attention towards something that someone has made and going on this journey, I think is actually becoming a lot rarer than people realize, because we don't watch entertainment that way anymore. Even the idea of like the video store and going and picking out that film with people together and then coming home, and because you paid for that one specific film, you're going to sit there and you're going to watch it with people because that was the plan. It all comes so easy to us now that I think we've let it wash over us a little more, and we don't necessarily take the time to appreciate how amazing that experience actually is. Because we've experienced that quite a bit, even just with this film and having the premieres in the Monarch Theater, is it becomes an experience for people to actually sit there and then hear people gasp at the same time, and then get a little bit sentimental at the same time, and then laugh at the same joke. And you're like, this is incredible. And I don't seem to remember having these experiences as frequently as I used to, particularly following COVID, when no one was going anywhere. And so you kind of like, there's been this good chunk of time where we've all sort of been disconnected, but then you get into a movie theater with everyone and you're like, this is amazing. This is such a fun experience. And it's so neat to hear that organic reaction to things happening all around me, like that doesn't happen as often as you think it would.
Yeah. Do you think that the pandemic put people in the headspace of being more receptive to that? Because I look back of like the slow moving but massive, trauma of the pandemic and being away from everybody else, and the experience of being in a movie theater and the experience of being in a live theater, and how like personally, like I am so happy to be back. I remember the first film I saw in a theater, once the restrictions were lifted, and it was a Godzilla film. I was crying, like I was weeping, because I was just so happy to be there. Like do you think that like because of COVID, like something, like people are more open now?
Well, I think it went
going
both
out?
ways, right? Because there was, myself included, there was a group of people who wanted to be back out in the world again and be doing things. And so when that was possible, we leaned heavy into having those experiences again. But then there was a whole other group of people that I think it became so easy to build your bubble that people stayed in their bubble after the pandemic ended. And they were like, well, I don't really need to go out to the movie theater anymore because we built this amazing home theater over lockdown. And now I can consume everything there. And you kind of see that a lot too. Like people almost need to be reintroduced to something like the Monarch Theater because they either missed it the first time or they never had that experience to realize what they were missing to begin with. So,
yeah,
like I said, this film was actually really good, a good excuse at getting people to come back in through the doors for the number of premieres that we ran, to say, you know, the number of people who said, I haven't been back in the Monarch Theater since like the 90s or since the early 2000s. And they would rediscover it. And you got to see it through their eyes that it was like, oh, this is actually incredible. Because you also have to remember, it wasn't just that the Monarch had kind of disappeared and the film going experience had kind of disappeared, but it was like all this other competition had risen up. People were used to going to like an IMAX or a Cineplex or whatever. And so this little single screen cinema was not really on people's mind anymore either, as even if they wanted to go see a movie, yeah, we're not going to go to that. That's like,
yeah,
you know, an old little theater. Let's go to the big screen, you know? So there's kind of a re-education that is happening here of embracing the nostalgia for one thing, but also realizing that the Monarch has the luxury of doing things that are totally different than what the Cineplex will ever do. The Monarch is the kind of place that you'd go see Rocky Horror Picture Show, or you'd go see the original Star Wars film again, or, you know, Casablanca, or, you know, a silent film. It has this amazing potential to do so many different things that, again, make you appreciate the history of watching those films in a place that was there the first time around.
Right. No, that very first screening of Your Cinema Needs You in the Monarch, take us back to that. Because I would imagine that maybe of all of the different screenings that you did, that was probably, I would assume, the most special.
I mean, the premiere experience in general for this became so much bigger than I think any of us had imagined, because the idea, of course, of having this film reopen the Monarch Theater and having a full house to do it, that was always going to be incredible. That was always going to be so nice to have all these people come back and see it. And the first screening was, of course, all these people who had helped out on the project and all the families and people who were involved. And that first night, you could tell it checked so many boxes in terms of what I was personally hoping to achieve with the film, of being like, oh, I hope people feel like they're exploring the space with me. But then I also hope that they're a little bit emotional about it. And then I hope they laugh a little bit. And then I hope they're excited about the potential of what this could be. And seeing that wave that would kind of happen throughout the film as people were seeing it unfold, you could have heard a pin drop about an hour into the theater, because you just knew people were hooked. They were in the story. They were glued to it. And then every once in a while, because I was in the back of the theater, kind of just gauging how people were reacting to things. And every once in a while, you'd catch someone who would just stop, and you could see they were like looking around the theater, and they were, you know, I reference a few things that are inside the theater in the movie. You could see people stop and take a moment, and they'd be glancing off at something and maybe like trying to absorb where they actually were, and realizing that, you know, they're in this incredible old building watching this film about the place that they're sitting in. And yeah, it was emotional and exciting and totally exceeded expectations when, after that first screening, we realized, you know, one was never going to be enough. And it rolled into 11 sold out shows at the Monarch Theater. So
wow, that's incredible.
we had over 4,400 people come to the Monarch Theatre specifically to see Your Cinema Needs You as part of the premiere run. So it was an incredible turnout. And you want to talk about nostalgia, it was just like it used to be, where people had to line up around the block to get into the theater because, like I said, it was sold out every single run that we had. And I couldn't remember the last time that I'd been in a theater to see a movie where every seat in the house was taken, you know?
Yeah.
And so that, like, to do that 11 times was just such a wild ride. And again, just an amazing, I think, response to show how people still love the Monarch Theatre, could see the potential of that place, and like I said, wanted to experience it in that building. So
how do you describe your relationship to the Monarch now?
Oh, geez. I think I've become an unofficial ambassador for the Monarch Theatre, because even though I'm not part of the board or the team that has taken it over, I am still very connected to what's happening there. You know, we're all regularly sending each other messages about what's going on and how the film is doing, and the potential of running even a few more shows of the film back at the Monarch Theatre as this, like I said, does its film festival run, and we find new people who are discovering it for the first time. So yeah, I'm an unofficial ambassador, very much connected to kind of what's happening there, and still trying. Like I said, this is all so new. This has only really been a few months since we had the first show and premiere, and that it opened at the end of 2023. So it's a big question mark about what's next for the Monarch, and how are they going to make this work, and what is the plan. I think there's a lot on their end that they're still trying to figure out, and that, like, I'm just as curious as everyone else too. How is the
Those were my next questions, actually. What is happening right now? Do they have regular screenings and things? So
this year in particular is really dedicated to renos. So there's all this work that has kind of gone by the wayside over the years. Like I said, the Monarch's actually in great shape in terms of it having a digital projector. The seating is all great. You could walk in today and screen a movie, and it's totally fine. But the electrics need work, and the plumbing needs work, and the ceiling needs work, and the roof needs to be redone, and the facade is cracking, and there's all this stuff that has just been kicking the can down the road for decades. So that's kind of been the focus of this year. Is there's been a few different community-driven screenings and events that are kind of peppered throughout the schedule this year, but otherwise it's been totally dedicated to doing all this renovation work, because there is a plan to completely redo the roof of the theater this year, and also restore the exterior facade and totally re-stucco. So it'll be a nice bright white again, just as it looked in the 40s. I think that's their slogan, is back to 41, is they're trying to make it look as it did when that renovation, to make it this Art Deco theater got overhauled. That's kind of the blueprint that they're working with.
I mean, I gotta say, I've never been to Medicine Hat, but this film made me want to go to Medicine Hat to see the theater. And I gotta say, maybe, you know, an annual event in the future could be like a big birthday party every year for the Monarch in December, you know? And then they could appoint you official ambassador, you know, of the Monarch, because I think that this would be, it's just my idea. All I know is the film, you know, to bring people, you know, to the Monarch. Your Cinema Needs You, the title, you know, it's like, as I say, I had that moment of like, oh my God, the cinema really needed you, Luke. But it's also something of a call to action to people in their own communities. You know, even where I live in Vancouver, you know, in the Kitsilano area, there was a theater here, the Hollywood Theater, that had a group sprung up around to save it in some way, and they did. Although it's not just a cinema anymore. It's like one of these multi-purpose kind of venues now. But what kind of advice do you have for people who hear the call, you know, of their cinema and want to be heroes in their communities and help save a cinema or some kind of heritage space?
Well, I mean, I think we tried to simplify that as much as possible for the sake of this film, and say, if you want to see places like this survive, just go to them again. because the number of times that you've heard about these little indie theaters or cinemas in these communities, a lot of times they do actually have people who are trying to make things happen. And the biggest challenge they have is just getting people to show up. And showing up is what keeps the stuff happening. The Monarch, I think before it closed down, before we started production on this documentary, it was running fairly regularly. But I think because it wasn't like a Cineplex where it's automatically where you think of and where you go to, it became too easy for people to kind of forget that they had this little like jewel in their back pocket all the time that was still there making an effort to get people to come and see things, but people just stopped showing up. And so really, if you want to see this stuff in your community, if you've got this amazing location, go to it and share it and tell people, I went here and I saw something and I liked it and you should go see it too. Because the stories I think that can come out of that stuff is really the kind of stuff that I think people are more inclined to want to share these days. It's like, you know, I don't feel the urge to want to talk about every single movie that I go to at the Cineplex. But if I go to an old theater like the Monarch and you see something that maybe came out 40 years ago, well, that becomes an experience in itself. And you can say, like, not only did I see an old movie, but I saw it in a place where it probably premiered the first time. It probably played here when it was a new release. And so that becomes an experience too. And there is something about being in those spaces that does change the experience. It makes you look at it differently. And you can't help but think, what was it like to sit in this theater when this was a new movie? And I think it's fun to kind of go on that journey. And it does. It kind of it bonds you to those spaces. It makes you say, I want to do this in other communities now. I want to go see this in other places. Because when you are traveling, like you go on vacation, you go to places like the Monarch Theater. You go to a place that isn't just everywhere. You go to a place that you think, that'll be a great picture or that'll be a good experience because I can't just do that anywhere. So those places exist everywhere. And I think a lot of times it's just a little bit too easy to brush them off for whatever is new and shiny. But it's not that complicated, I think, to champion these places by just participating, going, and going, seeing what's going on in your own community.
Speaking of championing spaces, I didn't know this until I read your bio, but your first feature-length documentary, titled Clay Creativity and the Comeback, was also about a heritage space as well, right?
Yep.
You know, and I'm wondering, well, first of all, what kind of connections do you see between, you know, these two films? And also, do you consider yourself to be kind of like, I don't know, like an avenger for buildings or heritage spaces or something? Because, like, I feel like a little bit of a theme here, Luke.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely, I think, a curiosity to explore in a lot of these places. And I've always been fascinated by abandoned or, vacant locations where you kind of feel like there's the clues left behind. And it's exciting to kind of get yourself lost in that potential of what this was or what happened, or there's some really good inciting incidents anytime you're in a space like that, because you're like, oh, this is why it failed, or this was something else that has sort of vanished in the background that, you know, is easy to get excited about, and you can see a story in there without fully knowing what it is. So yeah, with the one about Medelta and the Clay District thing, it was similar in the sense that it had started out as ruins. There was all these ruins of these factories that people thought, okay, well, maybe we could turn this into something, but it was already way further along because this had happened in the 70s and it has been saved. But I was like, well, how does it go from that? How does it go to being a place that people are now having their wedding in this incredible factory space that is like so dynamic?
Wow.
To like it's starting out as like industrial ruins, because industrial ruins aren't pretty. They weren't a place where you thought like, oh, people are definitely going to be having big events and weddings and fundraisers at a location like this. And,
Yeah.
you know, and it's happened. And so that was, that was exciting to kind of find that and realize that, again, volunteers and people in the community who were like, I can see a sliver of potential here to make something happen with this. What if we just lean into it a little bit and we'll tackle this one small piece first, and we'll see if that can snowball into something bigger and bigger. And like I said, here we are decades later. And that's what's happened, is it's become this place where artists come from around the world to work on ceramics and have studios here. And like I said, people will come and have their wedding at Mid-Delta Potteries now. And there's a museum attached to it. And it's, and it's a National Historic Site of Canada too. So it's a little like pin in the hat for Medicine Hat to brag about and say, look what we've done with this. The Monarch is so much earlier in its journey, despite its age. It's so much older than these places, but it's only been really in the last decade that people have even talked about it in a historic sense, because it was always just sort of a utilitarian movie theater. It was just, it's a business. It's a place to go see a movie. And only recently, because of essentially other theaters fading away or burning down or being repurposed, you start to realize, oh, the Monarch is accidentally important because there's not many like it left. And it's in its original location. It's always been the Monarch Theater. It's always been a cinema. It was never changed or repurposed into anything else. And that lineage suddenly becomes this incredible heritage site that makes you want to realize, like, you want to preserve something like that, because you realize all these other places actually had it before Medicine Hat did, and then just let it go. And so, there's something there where I just get excited about the potential for some of these places. And again, with the Monarch, the ability to explore it and uncover things that people hadn't talked about, people hadn't documented it anyway. That story hadn't been told yet, and it just happened to be in my own backyard. So there's an element of feeling a little bit of a responsibility, of thinking like, oh, I have the potential to do this. I'm located in a place where not many people are doing this type of work, and I have the resources to invest into a space like this to dust off a lot of those clues. And honestly, I think it's created a new benchmark now, because anytime someone researches the Monarch Theater, the documentary is really the starting point. It's like that gives you a huge jumping off point for someone even a century from now to look back on the history of the Monarch and say, well, here's something we can immediately jump into that story. We can immediately.
It's kind of cool to think like on its 200th anniversary, they could be showing your documentary.
Because that always goes through my mind too. It's like, when I was finding these things in the Monarch Theater, I highly doubt the projectionist or one of the old managers ever thought someone was going to come and find this random record in the basement or find this thing, and it was going to lead me on this journey to tell part of their story. It was, it was all these fragments. But I always thought too, like, how amazing would it have been to talk to these people when they were actually here, and how detailed that story would have been. And instead, I'm basing so much off of what I know from the random clues. But my random clues from doing this documentary are going to be someone else's story far after I'm gone, which I think is, again, such a cool part of doing this kind of work.
As the unofficial ambassador now for Heritage Spaces in Medicine Hat, I'm officially giving you that title.
Okay.
Do you have your sights set on any other sites, or have you had people in Medicine Hat come up to you and say, hey, Luke, I got something else for you to make a documentary about. I got another space for you to explore. Like, has that happened at all?
You can't have a premiere be as well attended as we did and not have everyone who's leaving the theater want to share their ideas. I think there's probably 1,000 other stories out there, and everyone has a little nugget of it without fully realizing what it would take to bring some of these stories to life. But yes, there's been a lot that I've kind of been brainstorming about, thinking like, okay, there are other places in town that, again, like for me, the hook is always having something that connects it outside of Medicine Hat. It's great to have a strong local story, but like I said, the thing that made this film work was that we could connect the Monarch Theater to really any old movie theater, and people would see their cinema in it. They would be like, I knew this, I'm from Winnipeg. I knew this Monarch Theater, and I'm from Victoria. You know, it was like, it's easy to connect the dots there because any movie theater that is as old as the Monarch Theater went through all the growing pains and had similar types of characters and had all those challenges. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to look at too with some of these new potential stories in Medicine Hat is I want something that is exciting, that has that local identity, but that also will connect with a broader audience who has never even heard of Medicine Hat, who can't find it on a map. That's totally fine. I want stories like that again will resonate regardless of whether or not you've heard of this place before or not.
I want to pull back a little bit and talk more about trying to figure you out, Luke, in
Sure.
in this conversation. I mean, we've talked about two of the documentaries that you've made, and we also in my introduction I talked about the commercial work that you do.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk though a little bit about your origin story as a I love superhero stuff, so origin stories are my jam.
Mm-hmm.
Like your origin story as a documentary filmmaker, like what was the first documentary that you remember watching, that actually you were watching and you're like, wow, like I like this genre, I could do something like this?
Jeez, that's a tough one. I don't know. I've in general, I think maybe my first introduction to a lot of it was actually probably when I was in film school was when YouTube had just started kind of like coming online. Everyone was sharing things to YouTube, and I remember there was all this great content that would come out that was about exploring abandoned spaces, and suddenly you had all this access to all these locations around the world that, like I say, ties really nicely into the kind of stuff that I'm doing now, but that would really pique your interest and make you say like, well, this is amazing that they're able to explore it, but they're not giving me the story. It's like they're wandering and they're looking at this stuff, but I want to know who did this and why is it here and why did it fail? And I'm
the same. I watch those videos. I love walkthroughs of like old malls, old factories, but it's like they're like, oh, like on the commentary in some of these I have to turn off because oh, that's so cool. Wow.
So I remember there was one that came out too that so after Titanic had come out, James Cameron did, I think it was like Into the Abyss. So it was about Titanic too. It was a documentary about doing the dive down to the Titanic and then filming in the spaces. And I remember watching that one thinking like, oh, I could just watch hours of this footage of them going through the shipwreck and trying to like go through the rooms. And stuff like that, I think always has really fascinated me. And again, wanting to know the story of why that stuff had either aged the way it had or why something survived and something else didn't. There were so many different things that really made me want to put energy into doing that kind of work. And I think it also tied in nicely with the fact that I was actually doing and still am doing a lot of travel photography. And travel photography is always about, building the scene. You're getting your establishing shots and then you're getting your close-ups and you're trying to be being the lens to make someone want to be somewhere. And so that aspect and then combining it with narrative is what documentary is. And so there was a lot of that where I kind of was doing bits and pieces of it before combining it into these larger projects and realizing like, oh yeah, I do want to have the time and the luxury of actually investing in those stories and fleshing some of those things out, because you can't capture that story in just a couple images or a YouTube walkthrough. You need to have those voices recorded and you need to actually be able to connect the dots between some of the scraps that you find left behind to sort of elevate it and to bring that to life so people know what actually is there. So yeah, that's probably the fragments anyways of where it started was YouTube and the travel photography side of things, and realizing that, yeah, I could layer a lot of those things up.
I mean, you made me want to go and spend time exploring the Monarch. So I think that whole travel photography, honestly, I'm telling you, tell Medicine Hat that Sabrina Rani Furminger in Vancouver thinks you should be the official ambassador, at least of the Monarch, at least of that, because I think that is I think that you are doing a lot, to really get people excited, not just about the Monarch and not just about, Medicine Hat, but also about their people's own neighborhoods, right? And looking at those spaces in their neighborhoods. Well, Luke, we are coming to the end of our time together today. So I guess for our final question, we will return to Your Cinema Needs You.
Sure.
How would you like audiences to feel, or what kind of feeling, would you like them to carry in them, as the end credits are rolling on Your Cinema Needs You? Or what kind of conversations would you like them to have, or questions would you like them to ask?
I think I'd like people just maybe to pause a little bit more, to just stop and look around and absorb what just happens to be in your own neighborhood. Because the Monarch is a prime example of something that I think the local community had become a little bit jaded towards and didn't really realize what we had there until not only this project, but this project definitely played a big role in sort of recontextualizing the history and the weight of how amazing it even surviving actually was. And I think when you're in the movie theater and you're watching Your Cinema Needs You, I think you have this moment where you stop at the end of it and you're realizing, I'm sitting in the same place that my parents and my grandparents and my neighbors and countless other thousands of people who have lived in this community came and spent their evenings and their weekends and grew up in spaces like this. And that connection, I think, is incredible. When you think of the weight of, I'm in a place that, for whatever reason, has outlasted all of these other places that existed just like it across Canada. But it happens to be in my community, and I have the pleasure of sitting here and absorbing this. I want people just to kind of realize that you can apply that same mentality to countless other locations, and a lot of times it's right under your nose. Sometimes it's unassuming. I use that word a lot, but a lot of what I found surrounding the Monarch was unassuming, and you wouldn't necessarily know to look for it and to take a second look until you started, like I said, just digging a little deeper than the surface, and you realize these places are amazing and they've got incredible histories that stretch far outside of the community that you live in. So I'm hopeful that that's what people take away after seeing Your Cinema Needs You is just how incredible a lot of these communities actually are, and that it could be hiding right under your nose.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Luke. And thank you for listening to and watching the TELUS Originals Doc Talks, and to our guest, Luke Fandrich. Watch TELUS Originals documentaries at TELUS Optik TV Channel 8 and watch.telusoriginals.com, and follow us at TELUS Originals on Instagram. Doc Talks are a production of TELUS Originals. This episode was produced by Sharon Bradley with technical support by Matt Waterworth. Ken Soy is the production executive for TELUS Originals Doc Talks. Doc Talks are produced on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. The viewpoints expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of TELUS.